A Werewolf Shifter Romance, written by Amelia Hart. Chapter 1. Shattered Wings. The fluorescent lights of Seattle General's emergency room buzzed overhead like angry wasps, casting harsh shadows across Dr. Sophia Laurent's exhausted face. At 26, she had already seen enough trauma to last several lifetimes. But somehow the constant stream of broken bodies and desperate families never quite numbed the ache in her chest, the ache that had been there since she was 18. "Dr. Laurent, incoming Trauma Bay 3, the nurse called out, her voice cutting through the controlled chaos of another Friday night shift. Sophia glanced at the clock. 2:47 a.m. She had been on her feet for 14 hours straight, surviving on nothing but black coffee and sheer determination. As she rushed toward the trauma bay, her mind briefly wandered to the packed suitcase waiting in her apartment. Tomorrow, today, technically, she would board a plane to France for her sister Marie's wedding, the first time she would leave American soil since that terrible night 8 years ago when everything changed. The memory hit her like it always did, sudden and brutal. Jake's laugh echoing through the forest as they hiked their favorite trail, the way his eyes lit up when he talked about their future together. Then nothing, just blood on the rocks and shredded fabric caught on thorns. The police had called it an animal attack, case closed. But Sophia knew better. Animals didn't drag bodies away so completely that not even bones remained. "Doctor, we need you now." The urgency in the nurse's voice snapped Sophia back to reality. She shoved the memories down deep where they belonged and focused on what she could control, saving the life in front of her. The next few hours blurred together in a familiar dance of medical procedures and life-or-death decisions. Sophia's hands moved with practiced precision, her mind completely absorbed in the delicate work of emergency medicine. It was the only time she truly felt at peace, when the ghosts of her past couldn't reach her through the immediate demands of the present. By the time her shift ended, dawn was painting the Seattle skyline in soft pastels. Sophia drove home through empty streets, her body exhausted, but her mind already racing ahead to the flight she would catch in just 6 hours. Marie had been calling every day for weeks, practically begging her to come early, to help with last-minute preparations, to finally meet the man who had captured her little sister's heart. Sophia's apartment was a sparse, functional space that felt more like a hotel room than a home. She had never bothered to truly settle anywhere, always ready to move when the memories became too heavy. The suitcase sat open on her bed, containing everything she needed for 2 weeks away from the only life she had known for the past 8 years. As she packed the last of her medical journals, she never traveled without them. Sophia caught sight of her reflection in the bedroom mirror. Pale skin stretched tight over sharp cheekbones, dark circles under green eyes that had once sparkled with joy, auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun that had become her signature look. She looked like what she was, a woman running from ghosts. The flight to Paris was scheduled to depart at 1 p.m. Marie had insisted on booking first class, claiming it was the least she could do since Sophia was using her vacation time for the wedding. As Sophia settled into her seat, she felt the familiar knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. 8 years of carefully constructed walls, 8 years of avoiding anything that reminded her of what she had lost, and now she was flying across an ocean into unknown territory. The plane was nearly full, 200 passengers heading to various destinations across Europe. Sophia nodded politely to the businessman who took the seat beside her, then immediately buried herself in a medical journal, the universal signal that she wasn't interested in conversation. She had perfected the art of invisibility over the years, becoming someone people's eyes simply slid past without really seeing. As they flew over the endless expanse of the Pacific Ocean, Sophia allowed herself a moment of hope. Maybe this trip would be good for her. Maybe being away from Seattle, from the hospital, from the constant reminders of her self-imposed exile, would help her finally start healing. Marie had sounded so happy on the phone, so full of life and excitement about her future. Perhaps some of that joy would be contagious. The first sign of trouble came 3 hours into the flight. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, calm but with an underlying tension that made Sophia's medical instincts prickle with awareness. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some unexpected weather conditions ahead. Please ensure your seatbelts remain fastened as we navigate through this system." Sophia looked out the small window and saw dark clouds gathering on the horizon. shot through with strange flashes of light that didn't look quite like normal lightning. The businessman beside her muttered something about electromagnetic storms, but Sophia was too focused on the growing sense of unease in her chest to pay attention to his words. The turbulence started gradually, gentle bumps that felt like riding over railroad tracks. But within minutes, it escalated into something far more violent. The plane pitched and rolled like a toy in the hands of an angry child, oxygen masks dropping from the ceiling as passengers screamed and prayed in a dozen different languages. Sophia's medical training kicked in automatically. Even as her own heart raced with terror, she found herself assessing the passengers around her, mentally cataloging potential injuries, thinking about triage procedures. It was easier than acknowledging the growing certainty that they were all going to die. The last thing she remembered was the horrible sound of metal tearing apart, the sensation of falling through empty air, and the strange thought that maybe this was how it was supposed to end. Maybe she was finally going to see Jake again. When consciousness returned, it came in waves of pain and confusion. Sophia lay on coarse sand, her body battered and broken but miraculously alive. The sun beat down mercilessly overhead, and the sound of waves crashing against a distant shore filled her ears. She tried to sit up, and immediately regretted it as agony shot through her ribs. Looking around with growing horror, Sophia saw pieces of the aircraft scattered across a pristine beach, like the remnants of some terrible dream. But there were no other survivors stumbling through the wreckage, no voices calling for help, no signs of the 200 souls who had been on that plane with her. She was completely, utterly alone. Chapter 2. Wild Encounters. Chapter 2. Wild Encounters. Sophia's medical training had taught her to assess and prioritize, even in the most desperate circumstances. Ignoring the screaming pain in her ribs, she forced herself to take inventory of her injuries. Possible concussion. Her vision swam when she moved too quickly. Definitely bruised ribs, maybe cracked. A deep gash on her left arm that would need attention soon. But she was alive, and that was more than she had any right to expect. The beach stretched endlessly in both directions, bordered by dense tropical forest that seemed to pulse with hidden life. No signs of civilization, no boats on the horizon, no contrails in the brilliant blue sky above. The silence was absolute, except for the rhythmic crash of waves and the distant cry of unfamiliar birds. Using a piece of twisted metal from the wreckage, Sophia managed to fashion a crude splint for her arm and tear strips from her shirt to bind the worst of her wounds. Every movement sent fresh waves of agony through her body, but she had learned long ago that pain was just another obstacle to overcome. She had survived Jake's disappearance, survived 8 years of self-imposed emotional exile, and she would survive this too. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when Sophia finally gathered enough strength to explore beyond the immediate crash site. She needed water, shelter, and some way to signal for rescue. The logical part of her mind calculated that search teams would already be mobilizing, that satellites would have tracked the plane's last known position. Help would come. It had to. But as she limped along the shoreline, picking her way carefully over rocks and debris, a growing unease settled in her chest. This didn't feel like any tropical island she had ever seen in travel magazines. The vegetation was too lush, too wild, and there was something about the quality of the light that seemed almost otherworldly. It was then that she saw them, footprints in the sand that made her blood run cold. They were enormous, easily twice the size of her own feet, with deep impressions that suggested something incredibly heavy had passed this way recently. But it was the shape that truly frightened her. They looked almost human, but with elongated toes and what appeared to be claw marks extending beyond each digit. Sophia's rational mind tried to explain them away. Perhaps some native animal she wasn't familiar with, or maybe the crash had distorted her perception of size and scale. But deep in her gut, where instinct lived, she knew she was looking at something that shouldn't exist, something that reminded her of the nightmares that had plagued her for 8 years. Following the tracks against her better judgment, Sophia found herself being led away from the beach and into the dense forest. The canopy overhead was so thick that it filtered the sunlight into an eerie green twilight, and strange sounds echoed from the shadows between the trees. Clicks and growls that spoke of predators watching her every move. The footprints led to a clearing where Sophia's worst fears were confirmed. Arranged in a perfect circle around the cold remains of an ancient fire were human skeletons, bleached white by years of sun and weather. The bones showed clear evidence of massive trauma, not the clean breaks of an accident, but the jagged tears that spoke of teeth and claws. Whatever had killed these people had done so with savage efficiency. Sophia's hands shook as she knelt beside one of the skeletons, her medical training taking over despite her terror. The bite marks on the skull were unlike anything in any textbook she had ever studied. Too large for any known predator, with a pattern that suggested intelligence behind the killing. These people hadn't been killed by mindless beasts. They had been hunted. A twig snapped behind her, and Sophia spun around to find herself staring at something that made her mind struggle to process what she was seeing. He stood just at the edge of the clearing, perfectly still, and watching her with eyes that seemed to glow with their own inner light. Tall and powerfully built, with the kind of presence that filled a space even when he wasn't moving. His skin was bronzed from sun and weather, marked with what looked like ritual scars along his arms and chest. Long black hair fell past his shoulders, and he wore simple clothes that looked handmade. But it was his eyes that held her captive, amber-colored and filled with an intelligence that was undeniably human, yet somehow wild in a way that made every survival instinct in her body scream warnings. "You shouldn't have survived," he said, his voice carrying an accent she couldn't place. The words were English, but there was something underneath them, some quality that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. The ocean doesn't give back what it takes in these waters. Sophia's hand instinctively reached for the makeshift knife she had fashioned from aircraft debris, her medical bag clutched in her other hand like a shield. "Who are you? What is this place?" Instead of answering, he stepped into the clearing with a fluid grace that reminded her of a predator stalking prey. When he moved, Sophia caught glimpses of more scars, more evidence of a life lived in ways that civilized people couldn't imagine. "My name is Kai Ravencrest," he said, circling her slowly like he was evaluating a specimen. "And you are trespassing on sacred ground." "Sacred ground?" Sophia's voice cracked despite her efforts to remain calm. "I'm a crash survivor. My plane went down, and I'm the only one who made it. I need help, medical attention, a way to contact rescue teams." Kai's laugh was low and somehow musical, but there was no humor in it. "There are no rescue teams coming, little healer. The storms that brought you here don't allow for such conveniences. You're in a place that exists outside the rules of your ordinary world." The way he said healer made Sophia's skin crawl. She hadn't mentioned being a doctor, hadn't said anything about her medical background. "How did you know I was—" "I can smell it on you," Kai interrupted, moving closer until she could see the flecks of gold in his amber eyes. "The scent of antiseptic and healing herbs, the steady hands of someone who saves lives. It clings to you like perfume." Sophia backed away until she felt the rough bark of a tree against her spine, trapped between the predator in front of her and the forest behind her. "Stay back. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I'm not interested. Just point me toward the nearest town or settlement, and I'll be out of your way." "There are no towns here," Kai said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. "No settlements, no civilization as you understand it. There is only the pack, and the laws that have kept this island safe for 1,000 years. As he spoke, his eyes began to glow brighter, and Sophia could swear she saw shapes moving in the shadows at the edge of the clearing, shapes that looked like they might once have been human, but had become something else entirely. The rational part of her mind insisted that shock and dehydration were causing hallucinations, but her body knew better. This was the same wrongness she had felt the night Jake disappeared, the same sense that she was in the presence of something that defied natural law. "You're insane," she whispered, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew they weren't true. Whatever Kai Ravencrest was, whatever this place was, it was all horribly, impossibly real. Kai smiled then, and Sophia saw that his canine teeth were just slightly too long, too sharp, perhaps. "But I'm also the only thing standing between you and a very unpleasant death. The choice is yours, Dr. Laurent. Trust me, or become another addition to this charming collection." Sophia's heart nearly stopped when he spoke her name. There was no way he could know who she was. No possible explanation except that she was trapped in a nightmare from which she couldn't wake up. But as the shapes in the shadows moved closer, and the amber light in Kai's eyes grew brighter, she realized that the nightmare was just beginning. Chapter 3. Reluctant Alliances. The standoff lasted several heartbeats, with Sophia pressed against the tree and Kai watching her with those unsettling amber eyes. The shadows at the clearing's edge seemed to pulse with movement, and she could hear low growls emanating from the darkness between the trees. Whatever was out there, it was waiting for some signal from the man in front of her. 3 days, Kai said finally, his voice carrying absolute authority. Ancient law gives me 3 days to decide your fate. You can spend that time running through a jungle filled with predators that will tear you apart for sport, or you can accept my protection and live to see another sunrise. Sophia's medical training kicked in, analyzing the situation with clinical detachment. She was injured, dehydrated, and completely lost on what appeared to be an uncharted island. Her chances of survival alone were essentially zero, but accepting help from this man, this creature, felt like stepping willingly into a trap. "What kind of protection?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "And what do you want in return?" Kai's smile revealed those 2 sharp canines again. "Nothing you're not willing to give. I simply want to understand how a human survived the Craven's fury, the storm that brought you here. No ordinary person should have lived through what you experienced." Craven's fury? The name sent chills down Sophia's spine. "You're talking about it like it's a living thing, isn't it?" Kai moved closer, close enough that she could see the intricate patterns of scars covering his chest and arms. They looked deliberate, ritualistic. The storms around this island are ancient guardians, older than memory. They don't allow outsiders to reach our shores. The fact that you're here, alive and relatively unharmed, suggests you're something more than you appear. Sophia wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all, but the skeleton surrounding them made mockery impossible. "I'm a doctor from Seattle. There's nothing special about me. I survived because of luck and medical training, nothing more. We'll see." Kai turned away from her, and the shadows at the clearing's edge began to retreat. "Follow me, Dr. Laurent, and stay close. The jungle doesn't forgive those who wander." Against every instinct screaming at her to run, Sophia found herself following Kai deeper into the forest. She had no choice. He was right about her chances alone, but as they walked, she kept one hand on the crude knife she'd fashioned and tried to memorize their route in case she needed to escape later. The path they took seemed to wind randomly through the dense vegetation, but Sophia gradually realized there was a pattern to their movement. Kai was avoiding certain areas, steering them around landmarks that she couldn't identify, but that clearly held significance for him. Once, he stopped suddenly and held up a hand for silence, his head tilted as if listening to sounds she couldn't hear. After a moment, he nodded to himself and led them in a different direction. "What was that about?" Sophia asked when she judged it safe to speak. "Patrol," Kai answered without looking back. "My people don't know about you yet. It's better that way, at least until I decide what you are." "Your people?" Sophia's stomach clenched with new worry. "How many others are there on this island?" "Enough." Kai's tone suggested that was all the answer she would get. They walked for what felt like hours, though Sophia's battered body made time difficult to judge accurately. Just when she thought she couldn't take another step, the forest opened into a small valley dominated by a series of natural hot springs. Steam rose from pools of crystal-clear water, and the air was thick with the scent of sulfur and exotic flowers. "We'll rest here," Kai announced, settling onto a flat rock near the largest pool. "The springs have healing properties. Your wounds will benefit from the minerals." Sophia eyed the steaming water suspiciously. "How do I know it's safe?" In response, Kai stood and began removing his clothes with casual efficiency. Sophia averted her eyes, but not before catching glimpses of more scars, more evidence of a life lived on the edge of violence. When she heard the splash of water, she risked looking back and saw him submerged up to his chest in the hot spring, eyes closed in apparent bliss. "The choice is yours," he said without opening his eyes. "But infection is a serious concern in this climate, and I suspect your medical supplies are limited." Sophia looked down at the makeshift bandages covering her arm, already stained with blood and dirt. He was right about the infection risk. and her knowledge of tropical medicine told her that untreated wounds in this environment could quickly become life-threatening. Swallowing her pride and fear, she moved to a pool on the opposite side of the clearing. "Turn around," she demanded. Kai chuckled but complied, and Sophia quickly stripped to her underwear before slipping into the hot water. The relief was immediate and profound. The mineral-rich water seemed to draw the pain from her injuries, and she could feel tension leaving muscles she hadn't even realized were clenched. "Better?" Kai asked, still facing away. "Much." Sophia had to admit he was right about the healing properties. "How did you know about this place?" "I know every inch of this island. I've lived here all my life, as did my father before me, and his father before him. This has been our territory for generations beyond counting." Something in his tone made Sophia look at him more carefully. In the fading light, she could see the proud set of his shoulders, the way he held himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to command. "You're their leader, aren't you?" "Your people, I mean." Kai turned to face her then, and in his eyes she saw something she hadn't expected. Loneliness. "I am what I must be. Leadership isn't a choice for someone like me. It's a burden carried from birth. Someone like you?" Sophia pressed, sensing an opportunity to learn more about her captor. "You wouldn't understand." Kai's expression closed off again. "Your world doesn't have room for creatures like us. Try me." Sophia moved closer, her medical instincts recognizing the pain behind his words. "I'm a doctor. I've seen things that would surprise you." For a long moment, Kai studied her face as if weighing some crucial decision. Then, without warning, his eyes began to glow with that inner amber light, and the air around them seemed to thicken with an energy that made Sophia's skin prickle. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that resonated in her bones. "I am Alpha of the Shadow Peak Pack, heir to bloodlines that predate your civilization by millennia. I am protector and predator, guardian and destroyer. I am what your people would call a monster." The power radiating from him was overwhelming, pressing against Sophia's mind like a physical weight. She should have been terrified, should have tried to run or scream or fight. Instead, she found herself fascinated by the complexity of emotions playing across his features. This wasn't the face of a monster. This was someone carrying burdens that would crush ordinary men. "You're not a monster," she said quietly, and Kai's eyes widened in surprise. "You're someone who's been alone for too long." The amber light in his eyes flickered and dimmed, and for the first time since she'd met him, Kai Ravencrest looked almost human. "You should be afraid of me, Dr. Laurent. Every instinct you possess should be screaming at you to run." "Maybe," Sophia admitted, "but you've had plenty of chances to hurt me, and you haven't. You brought me here to heal. You're giving me information you probably shouldn't, and you're risking conflict with your own people to keep me safe. Those aren't the actions of a monster." Kai stared at her for a long moment, then threw back his head and laughed, a sound of genuine joy that transformed his entire face. "You are either very brave or very foolish, little healer." "Probably both," Sophia said, surprising herself with a smile. "It's gotten me into trouble before." As night fell over the valley, they sat in comfortable silence, the hot springs working their healing magic, while an unlikely understanding began to form between them. Sophia still didn't fully comprehend what she'd gotten herself into, but for the first time since the crash, she felt something other than despair. She felt hope. Chapter 4. Forbidden Desires. The second day dawned with oppressive humidity that made the air feel thick enough to swim through. Sophia woke in a makeshift shelter Kai had constructed from palm fronds and bamboo, her body feeling remarkably better after the healing effects of the hot springs. The gash on her arm had already begun to close, leaving only a thin pink line where the wound had been. Kai was nowhere to be seen, but she could hear movement in the jungle nearby, the sound of someone moving with purpose through the undergrowth. When he emerged from the tree line 20 minutes later, he carried an assortment of tropical fruits and what looked like freshly caught fish. "Breakfast," he announced, settling beside the small fire he'd built the night before. "You'll need your strength today. We have a journey ahead of us." Sophia accepted the food gratefully, her stomach reminding her that she hadn't eaten in nearly 2 days. The fish was perfectly cooked, seasoned with herbs she didn't recognize, but that complemented the delicate flavor beautifully. "Where are we going?" "To a place where you'll be safer while I figure out what to do with you." Kai's expression was unreadable as he watched her eat. "Last night, I received word that some of my pack have detected your scent. They're curious about our unexpected visitor." A chill ran down Sophia's spine despite the tropical heat. Curious in a good way or a bad way? That remains to be seen. Kai stood and began breaking down their temporary camp with efficient movements. "My people have lived in isolation for centuries, Dr. Laurent. We've learned to be suspicious of outsiders, especially humans who somehow survive encounters with forces that should have killed them." As they prepared to leave, Sophia noticed that Kai moved differently in daylight than he had the previous evening. Every gesture was controlled, purposeful, as if he was constantly aware of the raw power contained within his frame. When he lifted their supplies, she saw the casual display of strength that would have required significant effort from any normal man. "How long have you been leader of your pack?" she asked as they began walking deeper into the jungle. 5 years. Kai's voice carried a weight that spoke of responsibilities gained too young. "My father was killed defending our territory from hunters. Human hunters who had discovered our existence and decided we were a threat that needed to be eliminated." Sophia stumbled over a root, and Kai's hand shot out to steady her. The contact sent an unexpected jolt of electricity through her body, and from the way his eyes widened, she knew he had felt it too. They stood frozen for a moment, his hand warm and strong on her arm, before he stepped back as if he'd been burned. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "I should have warned you about the terrain." "It's fine." Sophia's cheeks flushed, and she couldn't quite meet his eyes. "You were telling me about your father." Kai nodded, but she noticed that he maintained more distance between them as they resumed walking. "He was a good leader, respected by the pack and feared by our enemies. When he died, I was forced to challenge for the alpha position at 24, younger than any leader in our history. That must have been terrifying." Sophia found herself wanting to know more about this enigmatic man, who seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Terror was a luxury I couldn't afford." Kai paused to examine something on the ground. Tracks that looked disturbingly familiar to Sophia. "I had a pack to protect, and enemies who saw my youth as weakness. I had to prove myself capable of the kind of ruthlessness leadership requires." The way he said ruthlessness made Sophia's stomach clench. What kind of ruthlessness? Kai's smile was cold and sharp. "The kind that ensures my people's survival, no matter the cost. I've made decisions that would horrify someone like you, Dr. Laurent. I've killed to protect what's mine. And I would do it again without hesitation." Despite the warning in his words, Sophia found herself drawn to the pain she could see beneath his fierce exterior. "And who protects you? Who takes care of the man behind the alpha?" Kai stopped walking so abruptly that Sophia nearly collided with him. When he turned to face her, his amber eyes were blazing with an intensity that made her breath catch. "No one asks me that question. Maybe someone should." The words slipped out before Sophia could stop them, and she saw something shift in Kai's expression. Surprise, vulnerability, and something else that made her pulse quicken. For a moment, the space between them crackled with tension that had nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with the growing attraction she had been trying to ignore. Kai took a step closer, his gaze dropping to her lips, and Sophia felt her heart hammering against her ribs. Then a howl echoed through the jungle, long, mournful, and unmistakably predatory. Kai's head snapped up, his entire body going rigid with alertness. "We need to move. Now!" They ran through the jungle with Kai leading the way, his enhanced senses guiding them around obstacles that Sophia could barely see. Behind them, she could hear answering howls, growing closer with each passing minute. Whatever was hunting them moved with supernatural speed and coordination. "There," Kai pointed to a rocky outcropping ahead of them. "We can make a stand there if necessary." As they reached the rocks, 3 figures emerged from the jungle. 2 men and a woman, all moving with the same fluid grace that characterized Kai's movements. But where his presence commanded respect, theirs radiated barely contained aggression. The largest of the 3, a man with dark hair and cruel eyes, stepped forward. "So this is the human who survived the Craven's fury," he said, his voice carrying the same otherworldly harmonics as Kai's. She doesn't look like much. Careful, Fenris. Kai moved to place himself between Sophia and the newcomers. She's under my protection. Fenris laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Your protection? Since when do we protect humans, Kai? Our laws are clear about what happens to outsiders who discover our existence. Our laws also give me the right to make decisions regarding my territory. Kai's voice dropped to a growl that seemed to vibrate through the ground. And I've decided she lives. For now, the woman added, her eyes fixed on Sophia with predatory interest. But the pack won't accept this indefinitely. There are already whispers about your judgment, Alpha. Some are saying you've grown soft. Sophia felt the tension ratcheting higher with each word. These people, creatures, were discussing her death as casually as debating the weather. But it was the way they looked at Kai that truly frightened her. There was challenge in their gazes, the kind of calculation that preceded a coup. Let them whisper, Kai said. But Sophia could hear the strain in his voice. I am still Alpha, and my word is law. Fenris smiled, revealing the same two sharp canines that Kai possessed. Until the next full moon rises, Alpha. The Pack Council has called for a formal review of your decisions. If they find your judgment compromised, well, leadership can change hands quickly in our world. The threat hung in the air like smoke, and Sophia realized with growing horror that her presence was putting Kai's position in jeopardy. These people would use her as a weapon against him, and she couldn't bear the thought of being responsible for his downfall. How long? Kai asked, his voice deadly quiet. Until the next full moon rises, Fenris repeated. Tomorrow night, Alpha. If the human isn't dead by then, I'll challenge your right to lead. As the three figures melted back into the jungle, Sophia turned to Kai with tears burning her eyes. I won't let you lose everything because of me. There has to be another way. Kai's hand cupped her face with surprising gentleness, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. There is no other way, little healer. But don't worry about me. I've survived worse challenges than Fenris Nightclaw. This is my fault. Sophia leaned into his touch despite herself, drawing comfort from his warmth. If I hadn't survived the crash, then I never would have met you. Kai's voice was soft, almost wondering, and that would have been the real tragedy. Before Sophia could respond, Kai leaned down and brushed his lips against hers, in a kiss that was gentle and desperate, and filled with all the words they couldn't say. When they broke apart, his eyes were blazing with golden fire. Whatever happens tomorrow night, he whispered against her lips. I want you to know that meeting you has changed everything. As the sun set over the jungle, casting long shadows that seemed to pulse with hidden menace, Sophia realized that she was falling in love with a man who might not survive the night to come. And for the first time since the crash, she truly understood what it meant to have something worth fighting for. Chapter 5. Shattered Truths. The ancient dwelling where Kai brought Sophia that night was carved directly into the mountainside, its entrance hidden behind a curtain of vines and moss. Inside, the walls were covered with intricate carvings that seemed to tell stories of battles fought and victories won across countless generations. Torches flickered in iron sconces, casting dancing shadows that made the carved figures appear to move in the peripheral vision. This was my father's sanctuary, Kai explained as he lit additional torches around the main chamber, the one place on the island where even pack law cannot reach. You'll be safe here while I prepare for Fenris's challenge. Sophia ran her fingers along one of the carved walls, feeling the smooth stone beneath ancient chisel marks. The artistry was breathtaking, depicting wolves that seemed almost human, and humans that appeared decidedly wolf-like. These images, they're telling a story, aren't they? The history of our people. Kai moved to stand beside her, his presence radiating warmth in the cool mountain air. Thousands of years of survival, adaptation, and the eternal struggle between our two natures. Before Sophia could ask what he meant, footsteps echoed from the tunnel entrance. An elderly woman emerged from the shadows, moving with a grace that belied her apparent age. Her silver hair fell in intricate braids past her waist, and her eyes held the same amber glow as Kai's, though tempered with wisdom that spoke of decades lived. Morwen, Kai said, inclining his head respectfully. I didn't expect you here. The spirits called me, young Alpha. Morwen's voice carried the weight of authority that came from a lifetime of being listened to and obeyed. They whispered of changes coming, of old debts finally being paid, her piercing gaze fixed on Sophia, and of bloodlines thought lost returning home. Sophia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. I don't understand. What bloodlines? Morwen approached slowly, studying Sophia's face with an intensity that made her want to step backward. Show me your hands, child. Morwen, Kai warned, but the older woman silenced him with a sharp look. This is beyond pack politics, Kai Ravencrest. This is about prophecies older than your father's father. Morwen gestured again. Your hands, child. Let me see them. Reluctantly, Sophia extended her hands palm up. Morwen took them in her own weathered fingers, turning them to examine the lines and calluses with the focus of someone reading a sacred text. When the old woman gasped and dropped her hands as if they had burned her, Sophia's heart began to race. What is it? Sophia demanded. What do you see? The mark of Lyanna, Morwen whispered, her voice filled with something approaching awe. Sweet, merciful moon, you carry the bloodline of the Lightbringers. Kai stepped forward, his expression suddenly sharp with attention. That's impossible. The Lightbringer line was wiped out 2 centuries ago. The last of them was executed for loving an alpha too well, Morwen finished grimly. Lyanna the Lightbringer, greatest healer our island ever knew, was condemned for the crime of bonding with Alpha Marcus Shadowheart. They said her human blood would corrupt the pack, weaken our children, make us vulnerable to our enemies. Sophia's mind reeled with the implications. You're saying I'm descended from someone who lived here? That's why I survived the storm. Not just survived, Morwen corrected. Thrived. The island recognized your blood, child. It called you home. She turned to Kai with an expression that mixed triumph and concern. This changes everything about Fenris's challenge. If the pack learns what she is, they'll demand her death even more fervently, Kai interrupted, his voice heavy with resignation. The old prejudices run deep, Morwen. You know this. Or they'll recognize the prophecy for what it is, the elder woman countered. The return of the Lightbringer bloodline was foretold to herald a new age for our people. An age where the division between human and shifter could finally be healed. Sophia looked between them, feeling like a pawn in a game whose rules she didn't understand. What prophecy? What are you talking about? Morwen moved to one of the carved walls, her fingers tracing patterns that seemed to glow faintly in the torchlight. When Lyanna was executed, she spoke words that have haunted our people for 200 years. She said her bloodline would return when the pack faced its greatest threat, and that her descendant would either save us all or destroy us completely. Destroy you? Sophia's voice cracked. I'm a doctor. I save lives. I don't destroy them. Power can be dangerous in the wrong hands, Kai said quietly. And Lightbringer power was significant. Lyanna could heal injuries that should have been fatal, could strengthen our warriors beyond their natural limits, could even calm the beast within us when bloodlust threatened to consume everything. As if summoned by his words, a commotion erupted from outside the sanctuary. Shouting voices, the sound of running feet, and underneath it all, the distinctive howls that had become familiar to Sophia over the past few days. But these howls were different, filled with pain and desperation rather than hunting calls. Kai was moving before the sounds fully registered, racing toward the tunnel entrance with Sophia close behind. They emerged onto a rocky ledge overlooking the main settlement, and what Sophia saw below made her blood run cold. The village was under attack. Dark shapes moved between the buildings with supernatural speed, and she could see pack members fighting desperately against what appeared to be wolves of enormous size. But these weren't like Kai and his people. These creatures moved with mindless savagery, their howls containing no trace of human intelligence. Rogues! Kai snarled, his eyes blazing with golden fire. They must have detected your scent and followed it here. My scent? Sophia watched in horror as one of the massive creatures tore through a wooden building like it was made of paper. What does that mean? Lightbringer blood calls to the wild ones, Morwen explained grimly. The rogues are shifters who have lost their human sides completely, become nothing but beast and hunger. They're drawn to power like yours, seeking to consume it and become something even more monstrous. Below them, Sophia could see Fenris and his supporters fighting alongside the other pack members, their earlier political divisions forgotten in the face of mortal danger. But they were outnumbered, and the rogues seemed to feel no pain from wounds that should have been crippling. "I have to help them," Kai said, already beginning to remove his clothes with swift, economical movements. "Stay here with Morwen. The sanctuary's protections will keep you safe." "No." Sophia's voice was stronger than she expected. "If my blood is what brought this danger to your people, then I need to be part of the solution." "You don't understand," Kai argued, his human form beginning to blur and shift in ways that should have been impossible. "You have no training, no knowledge of how to control whatever power you might possess. You could make things worse." "Then teach me." Sophia grabbed his arm, feeling the bones and muscles restructuring beneath her touch. "You said Lightbringers could heal, could strengthen your warriors. If that's true, then sitting here safe while your people die isn't an option." Morwen stepped forward, her ancient eyes bright with something that might have been pride. "She's right, young Alpha. The prophecy speaks of choice. The descendant will either save or destroy. But hiding from that choice guarantees destruction." Kai's transformation paused, his features caught between human and something far more primal. When he looked at Sophia, she saw conflict warring in his inhuman eyes. "If you do this, there's no going back. Once you tap into Lightbringer power, you'll be forever changed. You'll never be able to return to your old life." Sophia thought of her empty apartment in Seattle, her life of endless work and careful numbness, the 8 years she had spent running from ghosts. Maybe it's time for a change. Another scream echoed from the village below, this one cut short in a way that spoke of terrible finality. Kai's decision crystallized in his eyes, and he nodded grimly. "Then we do this together. But you follow my lead. And if I tell you to run, you run without question." "Agreed." Sophia turned to Morwen. "What do I need to know?" The old woman smiled, and for the first time since they'd met, she looked genuinely hopeful. "Trust your instincts, child. The power knows what it wants to do. You just need to let it flow." As they prepared to descend into battle, Sophia felt something awakening deep within her chest, a warmth that spread through her veins like liquid sunlight. She didn't know if she was about to save Kai's people or destroy them, but she finally understood that some choices couldn't be avoided. The prophecy had found her, and there was nowhere left to run. Chapter 6. Blood and Moonlight. The transformation that overcame Kai as they descended toward the village was unlike anything Sophia had witnessed in her years of medical practice. His human form dissolved and reformed into something that retained his essential nature while becoming utterly otherworldly. The wolf that emerged was massive, easily twice the size of any natural predator, with fur the color of midnight and eyes that burned like molten gold. But it was the intelligence in those eyes that truly distinguished him from the mindless beasts terrorizing his people below. When he looked at Sophia, she saw not an animal, but the man she was falling in love with, transformed, but not lost. "Stay close," his voice echoed in her mind, and she realized with shock that she could hear his thoughts. "The bond between us allows this communication. Use it if you're in danger." They reached the village perimeter just as one of the rogues cornered a young pack member against a burning building. The creature was enormous, its maw dripping with saliva and worse things, its eyes reflecting no trace of humanity. Kai struck it like a force of nature, his powerful jaws clamping down on the rogue's throat before it could harm the cowering shifter. The battle was brutal and chaotic. Sophia pressed herself against a stone wall, trying to process what she was witnessing, while the strange warmth in her chest grew stronger with each passing moment. She could feel something building inside her, like pressure behind a dam that was beginning to crack. Fenris appeared beside her, his human form bloodied but intact. "You shouldn't be here," he snarled, his earlier hostility replaced by pragmatic concern. "These creatures will be drawn to whatever power you carry." "That's exactly why I need to be here," Sophia replied, watching as Kai engaged 2 rogues simultaneously. Even in his wolf form, he was being overwhelmed by their numbers. "How do I help them?" Fenris studied her face with sharp intelligence. You really don't know what you are, do you? Morwen was right about the bloodline. He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the center of the battle. Lightbringers don't fight from the sidelines. They fight from the heart of the storm. Before Sophia could ask what he meant, a rogue burst from the shadows directly toward them. Fenris shifted partially, his human form gaining claws and fangs. But the creature was too fast. It struck him across the chest with devastating force, sending him sprawling across the ground with deep gashes that pumped blood onto the dirt. "Sophia!" Kai's mental voice was desperate. "Get back to the sanctuary." But as Sophia knelt beside Fenris's broken form, something extraordinary happened. The warmth in her chest exploded outward, flowing down her arms and into her hands. Where her palms touched Fenris's wounds, golden light pulsed like captured sunlight. The bleeding stopped immediately, and she watched in amazement as his torn flesh began to knit itself back together. Fenris's eyes widened in shock. Impossible. I felt the healing. But more than that, I felt stronger. My wolf is responding to your power like it's been starved and suddenly offered a feast. Around them, the other pack members began to notice what was happening. Several wolves paused in their battles, drawn by the light emanating from Sophia's hands. But so were the rogues. Their mindless hunger suddenly focused entirely on her. "Now you've done it." Kai's voice carried a mixture of pride and terror. "Every rogue for miles will be coming for you." 3 of the massive creatures broke off from their individual fights, converging on Sophia's position with single-minded purpose. She could see the hunger in their eyes, the desperate need to consume whatever power she represented. But instead of fear, she felt a surge of righteous anger. These beasts had brought death to innocent people, had threatened the man she loved, and the community that had reluctantly sheltered her. The golden warmth in her chest responded to her emotions, growing brighter and more intense until she felt like she might burst from containing it. "Get behind me," she told Fenris, who was staring at his completely healed wounds with wonder. "You don't give orders to a beta," he replied. But there was no heat in his words. "Besides, I think you're about to do something that requires witnesses." The first rogue reached them, its massive jaws open wide enough to tear Sophia in half. She raised her hands instinctively, and the golden light burst from her palms like a physical force. The creature struck the barrier of energy and rebounded as if it had hit solid stone, howling in pain and confusion. But the light didn't stop there. It spread outward in waves, washing over the embattled pack members and filling them with renewed strength and vitality. Wounds healed instantly, exhaustion melted away, and their wolf forms seemed to grow larger and more powerful with each pulse of energy. The rogues, however, reacted very differently. The golden light seemed to burn them, and Sophia could hear their agonized howls echoing across the village. But more than causing pain, her power was doing something else. It was forcing the human consciousness buried deep within their bestial minds to resurface. One of the rogues collapsed to the ground, its massive form convulsing as it struggled with the return of human thought. When the convulsions stopped, a naked man lay in the dirt, his eyes filled with horror at what he had become. Others followed, the golden light stripping away the madness that had consumed them and leaving only broken individuals who remembered too late what they had lost. Incredible. Kai's mental voice was filled with awe. You're not just healing them. You're restoring their humanity. But the power flowing through Sophia was becoming too much to control. She could feel it growing stronger with each passing second, responding to every emotion, every desperate need around her. The golden light began to pulse erratically, and she realized with growing alarm that she might not be able to stop it. "Morwen!" Fenris shouted over the chaos. "We need Morwen." The elderly woman appeared as if summoned, moving through the battle with supernatural grace. When she reached Sophia, her ancient eyes were bright with something that might have been triumph. "The awakening is stronger than we hoped," she said, placing weathered hands on Sophia's shoulders. "But you must learn to channel it, child, or it will consume you." "I don't know how." Sophia's voice was strained with effort. The power wanted to keep flowing, wanted to heal every wound and right every wrong it could sense. "It has its own will. All power does," Morwen replied calmly. "The trick is learning to work with it rather than against it." Think of it as a river. You cannot stop the flow, but you can direct where it goes. Around them, the battle was winding down as the remaining rogues either fled or collapsed under the weight of restored humanity. But Sophia could sense something else approaching through the jungle, something that made the rogues seem like puppies by comparison. The Rogue King. Kai's mental voice carried genuine fear for the first time. The one who creates the others. He's coming. As if summoned by Kai's words, a howl split the night that was unlike anything Sophia had heard before. It carried intelligence and malice in equal measure, and every shifter in the village, rogue and pack member alike, cowered at the sound. From the jungle emerged a creature that defied description. Larger than even Kai in his wolf form, it moved with the fluid grace of a predator that had never known defeat. Its fur was silver white, and its eyes burned with an inner fire that spoke of power and madness combined. But it was the aura of corruption around the creature that truly terrified Sophia, where her golden light brought healing and restoration. This thing radiated decay and despair. Plants withered at its approach, and the very air seemed to grow thick and poisonous. That's not just a rogue. Kai's mental voice was grim. That's what I would become if I ever lost control completely. The Rogue King is what happens when an alpha's power turns completely inward, consuming everything it once protected. The massive creature's gaze fixed on Sophia with predatory intelligence, and when it spoke, its voice carried the remnants of human speech corrupted by centuries of madness. Lightbringer blood, it rumbled, the words barely recognizable through its transformed vocal cords. So pure, so powerful. Give it to me and I will let your pack die quickly. Sophia felt the golden power surge in response to the threat, but she also sensed something else. A darkness at the edge of her consciousness that whispered of easier paths, of power without restraint, of solutions that required no moral compromises. The Rogue King's corruption was trying to touch her, to turn her gift into something monstrous. Don't listen to it. Kai's voice was desperate. That's how the corruption spreads, through whispered promises of easy answers. But as the Rogue King began to circle them with predatory patience, Sophia realized that this was the moment Morwen's prophecy had spoken of. She would either save Kai's people or destroy them, and the choice hung in the balance like a blade poised above all their throats. The golden light pulsed within her chest, waiting for her decision, while the darkness whispered seductive promises of power without consequence. And somewhere in the middle of that cosmic struggle, Sophia Laurent, doctor, healer, woman in love, had to choose who she would become. Chapter 7. The Light Triumphant. The choice crystallized in Sophia's mind with startling clarity. She had spent 8 years running from the darkness that had claimed Jake. 8 years hiding behind walls of work and isolation. But here, surrounded by people who needed her, facing a creature that embodied everything she had feared, she finally understood what she was meant to do. I choose the light, she projected to Kai, her mental voice ringing with newfound determination. I choose to fight. The golden power responded to her decision like a dam bursting. It flowed through her with such intensity that her entire body began to glow, transforming her from a frightened human into something that blazed like a small sun. The Rogue King recoiled from the radiance, his corrupted form smoking where the light touched him. Impossible, he snarled, his voice distorting further as the golden energy burned away layers of accumulated darkness. The Lightbringer line was ended. I made sure of it myself. You killed Leanna, Sophia said, the knowledge flowing into her mind from some ancestral memory awakened by her power. But you couldn't kill what she represented. Hope always finds a way to survive. The Rogue King lunged forward with supernatural speed, but Kai intercepted him mid-leap. The two massive forms collided with bone-crushing force, and Sophia could hear Kai's mental scream of pain as the corruption tried to seep into his body through their contact. The Rogue King's touch was poison, turning strength into weakness and purpose into despair. Without hesitation, Sophia stepped forward and placed her glowing hands on Kai's wolf form. The golden light flowed into him, burning away the corruption before it could take hold, and filling him with power that made his already impressive form grow even larger. His midnight fur took on a golden sheen, and when he struck the Rogue King again, His claws cut through the ancient creature's hide like it was paper. Together, Kai's voice was strong again, filled with love and gratitude. We do this together. Around them, the surviving pack members began to move closer, drawn by the light emanating from Sophia's form. She could feel their pain, their exhaustion, their desperate hope for salvation. Without conscious thought, she began to channel healing energy to each of them, mending wounds and restoring strength with waves of golden power. Fenris was the first to fully understand what was happening. His partially shifted form straightened as the light touched him, and she saw recognition dawn in his amber eyes. The prophecy, he whispered, his voice filled with wonder. You're not just healing us. You're making us stronger than we've ever been. The other pack members felt it too. Their wolf forms grew more powerful, their human consciousness more clear and focused. The golden light was bridging the gap between their two natures, allowing them to access their full potential without losing themselves to the beast within. But the rogue king was far from finished. Seeing his corruption being systematically burned away, he threw back his massive head and howled, a sound that shattered windows and made the very ground tremble. If I cannot corrupt you, he roared, then I will simply destroy everything you seek to protect. The ancient creature began to change, his already massive form swelling with malevolent power. Dark energy radiated from his body like heat from a forge, and Sophia could feel the very life being drained from the plants and trees around them. This was his final gambit, to become so toxic that even her light could not purify him. He's going to explode. Morwen's voice cut through Sophia's consciousness with urgent warning. Channel all that corruption outward in a blast that will kill everything for miles. You have to contain him. Sophia looked at Kai, fighting desperately against an opponent who was growing more powerful by the second. She looked at the pack members who had accepted her despite their fears and prejudices. She looked at Morwen, ancient and wise and trusting her with the fate of everyone she had ever loved. The choice was clear, but it would require everything she had and more. I love you, she projected to Kai, pouring all her emotion into the mental connection between them. Remember that, no matter what happens next. Sophia, no. Kai's mental voice was desperate as he realized what she intended to do. There has to be another way. But Sophia was already moving, stepping between the rogue king and the rest of the pack. She opened herself completely to the golden power, letting it flow through her without reservation or restraint. The light blazed so brightly that everyone around her had to shield their eyes, and she felt her human form beginning to dissolve under the intensity of the energy flowing through her. The rogue king's explosion came just as she had anticipated, a wave of corruption and death that would have sterilized the island of all life. But instead of spreading outward, it struck Sophia's blazing form and was absorbed, contained within the golden radiance that surrounded her like armor. The pain was indescribable. Every atom of corruption that she absorbed felt like acid in her veins, and she could feel the darkness trying to twist her power into something monstrous. But beneath the agony, she held on to the image of Kai's amber eyes, the memory of his gentle touch, the sound of his laughter when he had let his guard down. Love, she realized, as the battle raged within her very cells. That's what makes the difference. The Rogue King has power, but he's forgotten what it means to protect something beyond himself. The golden light began to change, taking on new qualities as Sophia's understanding deepened. Instead of simply burning away the corruption, it began to transform it, turning darkness into light, despair into hope, hatred into love. The Rogue King's scream of rage became something else entirely, a cry of anguish and loss as memories of his humanity came flooding back. When the light finally dimmed, Sophia stood in a circle of renewed earth where flowers were already beginning to bloom. The Rogue King was gone, but in his place knelt a naked man with silver hair and eyes filled with tears. The corruption that had sustained him for centuries was gone, leaving only a broken soul who remembered what he had lost. Liana, he whispered, looking at Sophia with recognition and grief. I killed her because I was afraid of what she represented, afraid that love would make me weak. He looked down at his human hands, as if seeing them for the first time in centuries. But it was hatred that made me a monster. Sophia felt Kai's presence beside her, his human form solid and warm and wonderfully alive. The pack had gathered around them in a protective circle, but their expressions held awe rather than fear. Even Fenris knelt in the flower-strewn dirt, his amber eyes reflecting the golden light that still flickered around Sophia's form. "What are you?" the former rogue king asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm what Lyanna always was," Sophia replied, helping the broken man to his feet with gentle hands. "I'm someone who believes in second chances." Morwen stepped forward, her ancient face streaked with tears of joy. "The prophecy is fulfilled," she announced to the assembled pack. "The Lightbringer has returned, and she has chosen salvation over destruction." As the pack began to cheer, Sophia felt the golden power settling into a new equilibrium within her body. She was changed, transformed into something that was both more and less than human. But when Kai took her in his arms, she felt more herself than she ever had before. "The bond is complete," he whispered in her mind, and she realized that their mental connection had become permanent. They were mated now in the deepest sense, two souls joined across the species barrier. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Sophia looked around at the pack that had accepted her, at the man who had saved her from despair, at the new life growing in the earth around them. For the first time in 8 years, she felt truly home. "I'm ready for anything," she whispered back, and meant every word. The moon rose full and bright above the island, illuminating a community transformed by love, forgiveness, and the power of choosing light over darkness. And in the center of it all, Sophia Laurent, doctor, healer, lightbringer, finally understood that sometimes the greatest healing comes not from running away from the past, but from embracing a future that seemed impossible until the moment it became inevitable. As Kai claimed her with a kiss that tasted of moonlight and promises, Sophia felt the last of her walls crumble away. She was home at last. Chapter 8. Forever Home. 6 months had passed since the night that changed everything, and the island of Craven had transformed into something unrecognizable from the isolated, fearful place Sophia had first encountered. Where once there had been suspicion and rigid adherence to ancient laws, now there was hope, growth, and a sense of community that extended beyond the boundaries of pack politics. Sophia stood on the balcony of the dwelling she now shared with Kai, watching the sun rise over what had once been called the village, but was now something closer to a small city. New buildings dotted the landscape, constructed with a blend of traditional craftsmanship and modern techniques that Sophia had helped introduce. The healing center she had established occupied a place of honor at the community's heart, its walls carved with the same intricate patterns that decorated the ancient sanctuary, but incorporating new symbols that spoke of unity between human and shifter. "Admiring your handiwork?" Kai's voice came from behind her, warm with the affection that had only deepened over their months together. His arms circled her waist, and she leaned back against the solid comfort of his chest. "Our handiwork," she corrected, placing her hands over his. The golden bond between them hummed with contentment, their mental connection carrying wordless exchanges of love and shared purpose. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." Through their bond, she felt his amusement at her modesty. The healing center had been her vision from the beginning, born from her determination to prevent others from suffering, as the pack had during the rogue attacks. But it had become something far greater than either of them had initially imagined. Other packs from distant islands had begun sending their most critically injured members to Craven, drawn by reports of miraculous healings that defied everything they understood about shifter physiology. Each success had brought new allies, new friends, and new opportunities for the isolated community to reconnect with the wider world. "Doctor, Chen's ship should arrive this afternoon," Kai said, his tone carrying the mixture of excitement and nervousness that always accompanied their interactions with the outside world. "Are you ready to make history?" Sophia smiled, remembering the encrypted communications that had led to this moment. "Dr. Michael Chen, a trauma surgeon from Johns Hopkins, and one of the few humans who had stumbled upon evidence of shifter existence, had agreed to collaborate on a revolutionary medical exchange program. The official story spoke of studying traditional healing methods in remote island cultures, but the reality was far more significant. For the first time in centuries, humans and shifters would be working together openly, sharing knowledge that could benefit both species. It was a small step, but Sophia had learned that even the greatest journeys began with single footsteps. "I'm ready," she replied. And through their bond, she felt Kai's pride in her courage. 6 months ago, she had been a broken woman running from her past. Now she was someone who shaped the future with her bare hands. A knock at their door interrupted the peaceful morning, and Sophia turned to find Fenris standing in the entrance. The former antagonist had undergone his own transformation over the past months, his hostility replaced by grudging respect that had gradually warmed into something approaching friendship. His appointment as head of security for the healing center had surprised many, but Sophia had recognized the protectiveness beneath his aggressive exterior. "The morning rounds are complete," he reported, his tone professional, but carrying an undercurrent of satisfaction. 7 new patients arrived during the night, 2 from the Northern Reaches pack, 3 from the coastal clans, and 2 humans who somehow learned about our work. Humans? Sophia's eyebrows rose. This was a new development, and potentially a dangerous one. How did they find us? One claims to be a researcher studying traditional medicine. The other says he's writing a book about isolated island cultures. Fenris's expression suggested skepticism, but their injuries tell a different story. Bite marks, claw wounds, the kind of damage that comes from encountering our kind. Kai growled softly, his protective instincts immediately alert. Survivors of rogue attacks? That would be my guess, Fenris confirmed. They have the look of people who've seen things they can't explain, can't forget, and can't report without being considered insane. Sophia felt a familiar pang of recognition. How many others were out there, carrying the same burden of inexplicable loss that she had carried for 8 years? How many people had been dismissed, marginalized, or ignored when they tried to report encounters with creatures that officially didn't exist? Bring them to the center, she decided. If they've been harmed by our kind, then healing them is our responsibility. Through their bond, she felt Kai's immediate agreement, though it was tinged with protective concern. The decision to treat humans openly was a risk that could expose everything they had built, but it was also an opportunity to begin building bridges between worlds that had been separated by fear and misunderstanding for too long. The healing center bustled with activity as Sophia made her morning rounds. The main treatment area housed shifters from a dozen different packs, their injuries ranging from combat wounds to genetic disorders that had never been properly understood. In the research wing, pack members worked alongside the few trusted humans who had been brought into their secret, comparing notes and developing new treatments that combined the best of both medical traditions. Morwen met them at the entrance to the trauma bay, her ancient eyes bright with interest. "The humans are fascinating," she reported. "One carries scars from an encounter that matches the Bloodfang massacre from 3 years ago. The other has injuries consistent with a moon-mad alpha attack." Moon-mad? Sophia frowned. The term was unfamiliar, but she could sense the weight of meaning behind it. "An alpha who loses control during the full moon," Kai explained grimly. "It happens when the burden of leadership becomes too heavy, when the dual nature splits instead of integrating. The human side retreats completely, leaving only the beast." Sophia nodded, filing away the information for later study. Every day brought new understanding of the complex physiology and psychology that governed shifter existence. The more she learned, the more she appreciated how remarkable it was that people like Kai maintained their balance at all. The first human patient was a middle-aged researcher named Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne, whose left arm bore the distinctive pattern of claw marks that Sophia had learned to recognize. The woman's eyes held the same haunted quality that Sophia remembered from her own reflection in the years following Jake's disappearance. "You've seen them too, haven't you?" Dr. Hawthorne said, as Sophia began examining her wounds. "The things that aren't supposed to exist. The predators that hunt with human intelligence but animal savagery." "Yes," Sophia replied simply, allowing her healing light to flow through her hands. "But I've also learned that not all of them are predators. Some are protectors, guardians, people trying to live in harmony with their dual nature." The golden energy worked its familiar magic, knitting torn flesh and soothing damaged nerves. But beyond the physical healing, Sophia could sense the deeper wounds, the psychological trauma of an encounter that challenged everything Dr. Hawthorne thought she knew about the world. "This is impossible," the researcher whispered, watching her arm heal with eyes wide with wonder. "The cellular regeneration rate alone defies every law of biology I understand. Perhaps it's time to expand your understanding," Sophia suggested gently. "There's a whole world of possibility that exists alongside the reality you've always known. The question is whether you're ready to acknowledge it." The second patient was younger, a man in his early 30s who introduced himself as James Morrison. His injuries were more severe. Deep puncture wounds that spoke of massive fangs, internal damage that would have been fatal without immediate medical intervention. But it was his story that truly captured Sophia's attention. "I was camping with my fiancé in the Olympic National Forest," he said, his voice hollow with remembered horror. "Something attacked our campsite in the middle of the night. Something huge, with eyes that glowed like coals. Sarah tried to run, but it caught her, and His voice broke. "I couldn't save her. I couldn't even see what happened to her body. There was just blood and screaming, and then silence." Sophia's hands stilled on his injuries, her heart aching with recognition. "When did this happen?" "2 years ago. The Park Service said it was a bear attack, but I know what I saw. That wasn't any natural animal." James looked up at her with desperate eyes. "You believe me, don't you? You don't think I'm crazy?" "I don't think you're crazy at all," Sophia assured him, resuming her healing work. "I think you encountered something that exists in the spaces between our understanding, something that most people aren't ready to acknowledge." As the golden light flowed through her hands, healing not just his physical wounds but beginning to address the deeper trauma, Sophia felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. These weren't just patients, they were potential bridges between worlds, people who had already been touched by the supernatural and might be ready to help others understand. The afternoon brought Dr. Chen's arrival, along with a small team of carefully vetted medical professionals who had signed agreements that would have seemed like science fiction contracts to anyone unfamiliar with the supernatural world. The integration of human medical technology with shifter healing practices promised breakthroughs that could revolutionize treatment for both species. As evening fell, Sophia and Kai walked along the beach where she had first washed ashore 6 months earlier. The wreckage of the aircraft had long since been cleared away, but flowers now grew in the sand where her healing light had first manifested. They had become a symbol of transformation, of beauty emerging from tragedy. "Do you ever miss it?" Kai asked, his mental voice carrying gentle curiosity. "Your old life, the certainty of the world you used to know?" Sophia considered the question as they walked hand in hand along the water's edge. 6 months ago, she had been Dr. Sophia Laurent, emergency physician, a woman defined by her isolation and her dedication to healing others while neglecting herself. Now she was something else entirely. Still a healer, but one whose power extended beyond anything she had ever imagined possible. "I miss the simplicity sometimes," she admitted, "when the most complicated decision was which trauma bay to use, or whether someone needed surgery. But I don't miss the emptiness. I don't miss feeling like I was just going through the motions of living, instead of actually being alive." Through their bond, she felt Kai's deep contentment, his gratitude for the love that had transformed both their lives. "And the future? What do you see when you look ahead?" Sophia paused, placing her free hand over her abdomen, where the first stirrings of new life were beginning to make themselves known. She hadn't told him yet. The pregnancy was still too early for certainty, but the golden power within her recognized the dual nature of the child they had created together. "I see hope," she said, smiling as she felt his sudden surge of wonder and joy through their bond. "I see a new generation that won't have to choose between human and shifter, between two worlds that should have been one all along." Kai swept her into his arms, spinning her around as his laughter echoed across the beach. When he set her down, his eyes were blazing with the golden fire that had first frightened and then captivated her. "A child," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. "Our child. The first of many, I hope," Sophia replied, leaning into his embrace. "Children who will grow up knowing that love is stronger than fear, that differences can be bridges instead of walls." As they stood together watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, Sophia felt the profound sense of completion that came from finding not just love, but purpose. She had thought her story was about survival, about learning to live with loss and trauma, but she had been wrong. Her story was about coming home, not to a place, but to herself, to the woman she was meant to be, the healer who could bridge worlds, the partner who could stand beside an alpha and make him stronger just as he made her more complete. The island of Craven stretched around them, no longer a prison of ancient laws and bitter isolation, but a beacon of possibility in a world that was finally ready to acknowledge the magic that had always existed in its shadows. And at its heart stood Sophia Laurent Ravencrest, doctor, lightbringer, mate, and soon-to-be mother, living proof that sometimes the greatest healing comes not from running away from the impossible, but from embracing it with both hands. The future spread before them like an unwritten page, full of challenges and opportunities, setbacks and triumphs. But whatever came, they would face it together, their bond unbreakable, their love a light that would guide others home. The healing light that brought Sophia and Kai together on that remote island continues to shine across the supernatural realm. Every day, new stories unfold of mates finding each other against impossible odds, of healers discovering their true power, and of love that transforms even the most dangerous hearts. These untold romances are waiting in the darkness, werewolf alphas searching for their destined partners, powerful women awakening to abilities they never knew they possessed, enemies becoming lovers through bonds that defy nature itself. If Sophia's journey from broken survivor to powerful lightbringer resonated with you, our collection holds dozens of similar transformations. Each story promises the same intoxicating blend of danger, passion, and supernatural love that changes everything. Thank you for joining us tonight on this emotional adventure. Ready for your next escape into a world where love conquers all? Subscribe now, so you never miss these tales of forbidden desire and mystical connections. Your supernatural romance family is waiting.